12 fighters, over 70 participants in different skill levels, and a guy who made a Google form. This is what happened in that Google form. For a couple of days, I've been working on an experiment to see how fun every fighter is from a mix of everyone's point of views. From competitive players to casual players, I wanted to make sure a voice was heard from all sides as both types of players see things differently. However, before I talk some more, let me go over the whole survey I made. Basically, the survey asked for people of many skill levels to rank every fighter based on how fun they are from 0 to 10. It's very simple really. The more fun characters get a majority of higher ratings, and the lower characters get a majority of, well, lower ratings. Out of the 70 plus responses we got, I calculated the scores out of the maximum possible score to get the rankings for each fighter. I'll also cover some responses you guys made to some fighters and my personal opinion on how fun they are as well, so expect that. With that being said, let's get into the least fun fighter voted from you guys. I was not surprised with this fighter's placement at all, but man, did they get completely shut down compared to everyone else. At a disappointing average of 4.3 out of 10, we see our good pal Katana down here. According to you guys, Katana is the least fun fighter in the game, and the responses really help emphasize that point. I feel like his slow playstyle isn't very fun for me personally. It's easy to get zoned out as Katana, but if this were buffed in any way, he would be pretty OP. It's just a wall that can deal and take a ton of damage. I don't even know if there's supposed to be a right way to play Katana. Boring as hell character. I absolutely despise playing Katana. It's so ridiculously boring that I button mash M1s instead of holding the button down just to get bare minimum sensory feedback to not zone out mid-game. His E ability is pretty useless as melee fighters just choose not to attack you, and you can't counterattack rangers unless they're literally in your face. Missing your Q is also painful as you have to then walk at a snail's pace towards your enemy. There's a lot more negative feedback, but the whole problem comes down to either Katana being slow or being too brainless to be any fun to players, which I absolutely agree with. However, some of you've shown actual praise to Katana with points that I can actually get behind rather well. Simple and very solid character with noticeable weaknesses that can be covered by good game sense. OP on the surface but very intricate and complex below the surface. As my other main, I can tell you that this class is pretty fun. Yeah, not a whole lot to say. I don't really tire from him easily, and the high damage output plus being the closest thing this game has to a tank makes you feel powerful. Despite the few bits of praise people have shown, that won't cover the fact that tons of people find Katana to not be that fun to play as. Personally, I find him very slow, and a lot of the people agree with this common problem Katana has, which you can't really fix. Katana has his place to be fun, but overall, his whole concept is just flawed for the game. From here on out, most fighters are rather close to each other in terms of average numbers. They have decent ratings and seem to be fun characters to everyone from this point. However, our next character is someone I didn't expect to be this low, and that character is Vinestaff. I'm sorry, but Vinestaff is just not fun at all, to me at least. You kinda just hold, probably click for that buff thing I think she has, then go back to holding. Interesting gimmick with the AoE healing, but feels very hollow, lacks substance as a character, and doesn't carry any weight in a team. Very optional character. However, one response describes my thoughts on Vinestaff perfectly. I think healers tend to be one of the more less-minded individuals. Unlike Subspace, their goal is healing their teammates and winning. It's less fun in that sort of case, especially with Vinestaff. You can get assist easily without doing much. Although, I do like how they made different healers for different situations, like Vinestaff for the whole team, while Medkit is at one at a time. But it feels less put in thought for Vinestaff at times. Having the most middle of the road statistics, people commonly did comparisons to Medkit, and I fully agree. She feels like a way to make old Medkit much more balanced overall, but it kind of feels a little weird how she was forced into the game while another healer exists, which makes this power creep take place with her and Medkit when it comes to healing, which I find unnecessary. Overall, Vinestaff got a fair bit of love and hate for her mechanics. Overall, to the voting results, Vinestaff ends up in the bottom positions. Coming with a rating of 5.5 out of 10, right after Vinestaff, we got Hyper Laser, which I thought would be an incredibly tricky character to rank. And oh boy, a lot of y'all really nailed it with the exact thoughts on how Hyper Laser is. This one swings between a solid 3 to 9 and doesn't quite know which placement it wants to be on at any given moment. I suck at aiming and can't make use of Hyper Laser's mobility tools very well, so enjoyment is based purely on whether or not my opponent knows how to hold down their W key. I used to main Hyper Laser. Despite being the sniper of the team, there are multiple classes that reach as far as him, and he has a lot of counters. Literally every melee character, shuriken, and sometimes even slingshot can knock him down easily. He does a lot of damage, but when you're getting killed constantly by your counters because there's no good spots, he becomes tedious to play. Thus, I stopped maining him. Another character that really rewards skill, though this time almost entirely dependent on how well you can aim. The only problem is that rather than simply aiming with Hyper Laser, you have to consistently stay on the target because of how long each shot takes to charge up. Now, this is totally fine for the ult, which is literally an insta-kill, but with every other laser move, it's much too easy to get thrown off because of how long you need to lock onto the target. If you make one sudden movement, you're not landing the shot. Additionally, with how long it takes to shoot, self-defense is much more difficult. The fact that you basically stay still throughout the entire M1 action means if you try to shoot anyone at close range while they're chasing you, you're fucked. So all you can really do to defend yourself is run in most cases. At least it's less of an issue with the recent balance patches. On a good note, if you aren't being targeted, it's really fun to hit shots as Hyper Laser. You can do some serious damage when unnoticed. The rest of the responses really do share the same themes, mostly the theme of being skilled enough to hit shots. However, I think most of the fun comes from the team compositions, as some fighters like Shuriken or almost every single melee fighter can be an absolute pain to get off you. However, this can be paid off with some of the most satisfying gameplay you get. Overall, Hyper Laser makes its positives and negatives very clear, and that's why it places right here. With a 5.6 out of 10, we have a fighter that may surprise you for how low he could be. Some love him, some hate him, and that polarizing figure is Sword. Sword is given a good amount of love in this survey, however it seems that many people, specifically the competitive players, have much different takes on him. He's kinda brainless at the moment. Most of his damage is done by simply swinging your sword around, the flowchart combo, and ulting at random occasions with no thought put into it. This feels like he gets no penalty for holding M1 and also gets punished for trying to perform combos as a nerf instead of making the abilities perform well with each other in a way that doesn't give him a free 100 damage. Also, the grab is annoying. I know it's getting nerfed soon, but it's the biggest void fishing source in the game currently. Just an overall brain dead class to play, even worse than Katana. Some of the more mixed players in both skills do show their support to Sword at times. Extremely simple character that has pretty good range, damage, and mobility. The lunge attack can also be used to murder people really easily, so that's cool. Not really the most interesting character out there, but it's easy and feels smooth to play. In a way, Sword depends on if you think simplicity is a good trait or not. Some responses show distaste for his simplicity and game plan, while others love the entry-level skill and simplicity to his kit. I am more of the middle since I like how entry friendly he is, but at the same time I find him a little boring to play for periods of time. At the end of the day, it depends on the player, which makes Sword place here on the list. From a simple character to a much more complex character in Kit, coming in at 8th place with a 6 out of 10 is Medkit. Medkit is the other healer in the game and is naturally given a higher score, since most of your responses can reflect on how Medkit is a much more active fighter than Vinestaff. I started playing Medkit ever since he held a revolver. Not only do I really love revolvers, I'm a fan of how the class encourages dealing damage on your enemies while still being supportive. I like being able to help my teammates while I'm actively hitting the enemies. Though, as much as many support mains love actively healing their teammates, I'd take dealing more damage for less healing in a heartbeat. In fact, most of your positive responses are basically about how Medkit could go aggressive at enemies and support people at the same time, which makes a fun mechanic that supports skillful play. However, not everyone is a fan of Medkit. Medkit is not exactly fun, I'd say. Being active the whole round staring at your allies' health bars and trying to make sure that Biograft with 0 patience lives is quite boring. Also, not being able to effectively heal yourself while being attacked or when you're at low HP is a downside because you have no shield, but Medkit's E often gets the job done. Now, I never liked playing as healers in the first place, but Medkit just isn't fun to me naturally because of how healers are. However, I see people say Medkit isn't fun either because he lacks in aggression or being a fighter that simply can't do enough. Thus, Medkit lands himself in 8th place. This one is a huge shocker since the last 12 hours of the survey changed his character from being in the top 3 to getting down to 7th place. In 7th place, we find Biograft sitting with a 6.1 out of 10. This falls under the problems of Hyperlaser with the character being based on skillful play. I love playing as Biograft. He does rely on enemies being on low damage, so if you're the only melee or the last player standing, it can be annoying. Also has the learning curve but rewarding. His ult is very situational that it kind of feels like a waste of an ult as every other character has ults that can be used more often. The Q ability is the best thing to ever exist. Actually, Biograft in his entirety is the best thing to ever exist. His M2, his E, underrated. Everything about him is so fighting. Love the risk that comes with his low health. Absolutely schmoovin'. Fun mobility, fun gimmicks, fun gameplay loop. But I feel like I'm unable to contribute as much when it comes to certain situations. Probably skill issue. In the end, Biograft really comes down to how much you love playing as him. Lots of competitive players praise his high skill floor and how satisfying he can be, while others think his moveset isn't much and how some moves just aren't really fun to use. Due to this intense skill barrier, Biograft places at the 7th spot. Well, this is something I did not expect. A full-blown tie after rounding scores. These characters somehow got the same score, and thus, I will put them both together for this. And those that tied were Rocket and Shuriken, both placing in 6th with a 6.2 out of 10. Starting off with Rocket, he falls under characters like Sword, in which his simplicity can be a deal breaker and his specific quirks can be off-putting to a lot of people. Rocket has the same strengths and weaknesses as Sword when it comes to how fun he is to play. Easy to pick up, can be a useful asset to the team, but I'd simply rather play other Rangers. Rocket is super fun, generic but fun. I love the area damage that the Rocket burst out with. The only reason I give it a 9 is because giving self-damage Q is really bad. I don't think it really was needed. In fact, they should at least let Rocket self-damage to at least 5. 10 is too much for that. Overall, people like the Rocket for his simple nature, yet how fun it is to have area damage. A good amount of people do express him for being too simple or not too satisfying, but he was given a lot of love throughout his responses. As for Shuriken, he got much more of a mixed response from people. Too much multitasking, not enough damage abilities. He only has M1 and M2 as his damage. Q and E aren't effective. His ultimate is just big shuriken equals more damage. M2 is just too hard to hit. It's like being a ranged and a melee at the same time, but bad. Shuriken is only fun if you want to actively piss people off. They are one of the most unbalanced characters in this game currently. If they were more balanced, maybe I would like them. Their current ultimate is kind of too little, which I'm glad they're changing it to a lot more shurikens around Shuriken. Shuriken really got tons of comparisons to Biograft and more love for how annoying he could be to people. I personally never liked Shuriken at all, since he just felt like a ranged character that relied heavily on jump spamming and wonky gimmicks, which I never liked. Despite being different fires mechanically, and one of them I absolutely despise, Rocket and Shuriken shared a 6th spot with each other, which makes way to our final 4. Finally, coming in at the number 4 spot, we have my main Boombox, coming in with a 6.4 out of 10. Boombox got some of the most detailed responses for this poll, with people listing reasons as why he is fun while others really went at his gimmick as a drawback. While I've only started playing Boombox for 2 days, I'd say Boombox is very fun. I don't mind the rhythm game and you can sort of easily kill enemies. Although while fighting, I often lose my focus and start to miss beats, causing me not to be able to attack for a while, which often ends up in my demise. However, Boombox is still a fun character to play, he just has a high skill ceiling. Some of the more negative responses are reasonable, however, with some pointing at his gimmick or some other aspects of his kit that make no sense. His passive is really unique and interesting, though as an outsider it's really hard to pick up the class. Until you've really mastered the timing of the rhythm game passive, it's really demanding and makes it hard to focus on anything other than your own M1. Not to mention, it isn't synced with the music, actively going against the actual beat. It's true that syncing the M1 to the music would make balancing a huge pain in the ass. However, this weird clash between the beat of the music and the beat of Boombox's M1 makes the music, a huge part of the game, and ironically what the Boombox is revolved around, a nuisance to your gameplay. I think I'd rather listen to the music. A lot of the shorter responses show love for the character in general, and how he can act as a defensive and offensive character at will. However, a lot of players simply never liked the gimmick or just didn't like how he could really fill much of a support role well. I have a bias for Boombox when talking about him, but all the criticisms are valid since the metronome is something you slowly just adapt the muscle memory to, which can get annoying. I mostly like how he can basically adapt tons of versatile roles, and that's really all I can say before I go on a whole rant about Boombox. Overall, Boombox lands himself with good praise and at the 4th spot. Now we're at the top 3, and these had to be scored differently. 2 of the fighters were separated by decimals away, barely. At number 3, we see Subspace with an average of 6.71 out of 10, a very narrow score compared to everyone else. I wasn't expecting to see Subspace this high, but sometimes talking about fun elevates a character more when it's not all on viability. My first favorite and the character I used to main most. I love setting up a minefield for enemies to walk right into and watch their HP drain. Catching entire teams in a well-placed ult is also very gratifying and can turn the tides of battle in your team's favor. He has great self-sustain and is very useful for defending the point on Conquer. I don't play him as much since I've started expanding into playing other characters like Shuriken, but if I see Doomspire pop up in map rotation, I already know I got plans involving me, Subspace, and a big old plane. The constant damage tick sound is incredibly satisfying. It's also fun to set up all your mines at a choke point and watch as some sucker walks through and loses more than half their HP for it. Otherwise though, Subspace is pretty hard to use for me. I wouldn't mind playing him more though, as his gimmicks are interesting and I find him pretty useful in some situations. There's a friend of mine who plays a pretty good Subspace and has pocketed my Biograft before. It's absolutely brutal if you can get good momentum going. Despite tons of positive reception for Satisfaction, a few responses were actually against Subspace as a whole. Subspace is the most boring character in the game, without a doubt. He has a boring M1, a slightly less boring M2, an uninspired Q, a decently cool E, and Zarya's Graviton Surge if you couldn't shoot it. The finisher is the most fun part of his kit, assuming you hit it. I just can't find any satisfaction in holding M1, pressing a few buttons sometimes, and then winning a match. What's worse is, he's super reliant on his team. If his team doesn't focus the guy he's weakening, you're just worthless. Katana may be boring, but at least he can do stuff without yelling at his team. If only Subspace didn't have the most boring moveset in the game. However, most of the reception was positive. If you ask me, Subspace is a bit weird to play as, but the constant damage and hearing explosions is so satisfying to me. A lot of the people agree with me on this, and that's why I personally find Subspace fun. Despite all the positivity to his playstyle, Subspace places 3rd place, which means 2 other fighters placed higher than him. Coming in at 2nd place, we see Slingshot swooping in with a 6.73 out of 10, which is why it was so close between him and Subspace. This is another case in which I think the responses perfectly described my thoughts about him as a fighter. Same tier as Rocket with being basic but a lot more fun. His M1 allows for either a rapid fire that deals about 5 damage or a charge fire that deals 20 damage, which is a fair amount that doesn't get too annoying. His M2 no longer stuns and only roots, so it's also not as bad to deal with, and his Q enforces close range play to maximize it, and it's easy to dash to get farther away. His entire kit revolves around going from medium long range to close range while being speedy with it due to his passive allowing him to go fast if he combos his abilities well. A nice way to force his mains to change up how he is played every so often. Simple as that really. The way Slingshot could combo into his abilities while maintaining many ranges make him so versatile and fun due to his mobile nature, and that's what makes him such an entertaining character to many people. Some people have a bit of small issues with his kit's whole design, but even then, it's not big enough of an issue to them. He has a pretty interesting moveset, though I always felt like it was a bit clunky in comparison to my main Biograft. For one, he has a double jump, but you have to press again just to start walking on air. This took a while to get used to because it logically looks like you would be able to just hold space and start walking, rather than having to press space thrice just to stay in the air. Not to mention, this is a really important part of his movement. Staying in the air is a crucial part of keeping a distance from melee characters. Also, I feel like his dash is kinda weird, but I think that's just me. With all of this combined, Slingshot lands himself a second place position. But then that actually leads to the question of who could possibly top him? Well, we're finally here at the number 1 spot. I was not surprised with this result being high, but number 1 was something I did not expect surprisingly enough. There's an overall score of 6.8 out of 10, and having the most positive responses I've seen throughout the poll, we have the one and only Skateboard. Say what you want with his annoying gameplay, but the responses do share the same thoughts on him as a character when it comes to how fun he is. Oh my god, I love the mechanic. I just love being able to essentially move around fast, doing tricks, and overall being a bit of a pest. I don't know, riding around as Skateboard scratches a certain part of my brain that I enjoy. Also nice to stay away from the main heat of the battle. In Conquer, it's great, but sometimes it can be hard to annihilate depending on the others you face. The fun of Skateboard doesn't come from getting high kill streaks and such, it comes from the neuron activation of looking cool and occasionally running over a couple of people, though the fact that lower stats are common does drive it away a little bit. A lot of the responses feel like Skate is underpowered, but that doesn't matter much to them since Skate at his core is designed to be incredibly fun even in more negative responses. Skateboard's speed and mobility as well as unique playstyle is the most fun part about playing him. However, due to his difficulty to play as well as many nerfs and balance patches to the very thing that made him fun, it's a lot harder to enjoy. I also find myself struggling to make myself a very useful component to my team as Skate. If the team needs someone to rush down opponents or chip away HP, there are many better picks. The high speed and tricks are very silly, but the transition between offboard and onboard feels super awkward. There's also a lot of maps where Skateboard is just hot garbage because of too low ground to skate on, too little areas for tricks, too many walls and obstacles, etc. Overall, a fun character and concept, but it's hard to get used to. Skateboard just gets nerfed a lot due to being annoying to play against. It's unfortunate because it does affect how funny he is to use, but I know why the patches were made, to make the game more fun for others. Despite all these changes and making Skate much worse, that doesn't matter to me since Skateboard is still fun as all hell as a character. With all of this combined, Skateboard snags the number 1 spot as the most fun fighting character you guys voted on. Thank you all for taking the time and probably watching this video, and thanks to all who answered into the poll and giving your input. I enjoyed going through all the responses and seeing people's takes on fighters. I did like the differences people showed and such, which gave more insight to me, and thus I would like to thank BogCon for being the main source of all of these results. While we didn't get a ton of results, I had fun conducting this short yet fun experiment to see how people see the characters in a different setting outside of viability. I had lots of fun with it and might be open to doing more experiments like this. I would wait some more time before closing the polls or maybe be much more polished with polls, but at the end of the day, It's a stupid experiment some guy wanted to make because he was bored. Also, KFC won. Why did you guys vote KFC? It's literally the worst one on the list. But I'm not here to judge your taste buds. You do you.